Now normally when you look at the basic cybernetic work, there's a hypothesis that the system is oriented towards a goal, and that it's comparing what is manifesting itself in the world to that desired end state as the system moves. But it's too simple, because people don't precisely have goals. They have nested hierarchies of goals. And so the issue of emotional regulation becomes more complex than, are you proceeding happily towards your current goal? Because your goal is composed of micro goals, and it's a constituent element of a set of macro goals. And so that makes the problem of error far more complex than it would be if you only had one frame of reference and you were only adjudicating your error within that frame of reference. The question starts to become, what does it mean when you make a mistake? And the answer to that, the behavioral answer to that was, well, you encounter a stimuli that's a threat, or maybe a punishment, or an incentive reward, or a consummatory reward, something like that. It's a unidimensional and oversimplified answer. I'm not complaining about it. It has great utility. But there's a problem, and the problem is it doesn't take into account the nested structure of your goal hierarchy. And what that means is that it underestimates the difficulty of responding to an error. Because the problem with an error is that you don't know what the error signifies. And that's a huge problem. And that's part of what I want to delve into even in more depth today. And so this is like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. It's exactly the same thing. That's the rabbit hole is, you made a mistake, right? You made a mistake. You've got your oversimplified representation of the world laid upon it. It validates itself in its execution if it executes properly. If it executes improperly, then what does that signify? And the answer isn't precisely that you've made a mistake. The answer is, it signifies that there's something in the world that you excluded that shouldn't have been excluded. And that's a big problem, because when you've laid out a simplified schema on the world, you've excluded virtually everything. And so what that means is that as soon as you make an error, the search space for the error immediately tends towards the infinite. And you experience that. It's part of human existential experience. And the way you experience that is, especially if your mood is shaky, is you lay out a small plan, like maybe you go out for coffee with someone that you're romantically interested in, and they're not pleasant to you, and so that's an error. It means, well, what does it mean? Well, you've construed yourself wrong, you've construed them wrong, you've construed the opposite sex wrong, you've construed human beings wrong, you're a walking catastrophe, and you might as well not even exist. It's like, well, that's pretty extreme, but it's not that extreme, I'll tell you. Like, it's not that uncommon for people to have exactly that set of catastrophic responses to even a minor setback. Now, it's not good for them, and I would say, you know, just because you scraped your foot doesn't mean you should dig a grave and jump into it and pull the dirt on top of you, you know. So you don't want to start by taking yourself completely apart, but that doesn't mean people won't do it. They do it all the time. In fact, to me, it's always a mystery that they don't do it every single time, because the logical inference for why didn't you get someone interested in you could easily be because you're a failure as a human being. And at some level, that's actually true. Now, it's true in a way that's not that helpful, right? Because it's just too catastrophic. But it isn't obvious at all how people can defend themselves against that cascade of catastrophizing. I mean, after all, if you were everything you could be, then maybe everyone would be attracted to you. I mean, perhaps not, but you get the point. And so, when we're looking at for universality, the first thing we might say is, well, you have a frame of reference that you've laid on the world. It's a story. You live inside a story. And the second thing we could say, and that's universally true, the content of the story can differ. That's okay. I don't care about that. It's the structural equivalence that I'm interested in. You live inside a story. And you have to, because you have to live in something like that, because you are goal-directed, and you have to be. And you have to simplify the world, because you're just not enough of you to take into account everything at once. In fact, you can hardly take into account anything at once. So you have to narrow things unbelievably. And by narrowing and including only certain things, you exclude virtually everything else. So you're always in the situation where you have this little bounded universe that you inhabit, but outside of it is chaos itself. And and so that's the existential landscape. Order surrounded by chaos, right? It's like a tree. It's like the evolutionary home of primates, the tree with the snakes on the ground. That's our landscape. Or it's the fire for tribal people, and the terrors of the forest that are beyond the light that the fire casts. It's explored territory versus unexplored territory, and that's an archetype as well. That you can't not be in a situation where that's the case. And so you might say, well, what do you discover when you make an error? And the answer is, first, it's a brief manifestation of the dragon of chaos, and that's no more to say than when you encounter the incursion of unexplored territory into explored territory, the circuitry you use is the same circuits that we use to respond instantaneously to the presence of predatory forces. We use that circuit, and that makes perfect sense, because the predator is almost by definition the thing that lurks beyond the safe confines of the community. So the first assumption is, when something unexpected emerges, so we'll call that the snake in the garden, that you're prey and that's a predator, and that the monster has come to get you. It's something like that. Now the representation of the dragon is more complex than mere monster, because the dragon, the mythological dragon, also is the thing that hoards treasure. And I really like that symbol. I think that's also why it will never go away. It's such a great symbol, because it says, well, the unknown can take you down. It can bite you with its fiery breath like a poisonous snake, and it can burn things like fire, and it's an aerial predator that can take you from the air, and it's a carnivorous predator that can take you from the ground, and it's reptilian. It's the sort of thing that can pull you down into the water. And it's easy to see that as an amalgam of the threats that have been laid forth for human beings since the beginning of time. And monster is an amalgam of predator. And you might say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, yes, there is. It's just a loose category. What's common across all predators equals dragon. It's not like they're not real. They're hyper real. They're more real than the phenomena themselves, just like an abstraction can be more real than the phenomena themselves. And then the canonical dragon for human beings isn't just a predator. We're not rabbits. You could imagine that the dragon for a rabbit is just a dragon. There's no damn treasure there at all. But for human beings, it's ambivalent, because the thing that you don't know about is also the thing that holds the greatest gift. And why is that? It's because the unrealized world manifests itself when you make an error. And the unrealized world is something that can take you down, obviously, but it's also the source of all new information. It's an infinite source of information, and that's a really useful thing to know. Error is an infinite source of information.